To find an inverse function, well, first they have this restriction on the domain. Look, a parabola usually doesn't have a proper inverse because an inverse needs to be 1-to-1. In other words, it's got to pass a horizontal line test. It means it's only going to touch once if you're to draw a horizontal line through the function. This fails the horizontal line test. Parabolas usually fail the horizontal line test. If you were to graph this parabola, x squared plus 5, look something like this if you're graphing Desmos, but they're saying we're only doing it for x is greater than or equal to 0. So this is our function. Only the x values that are on the right side of the y-axis, only when x is greater than or equal to 0. This does have an inverse. To find its inverse, you can replace f of x with the letter y. That's usually easier for students. And then the first step in finding an inverse is to switch x and y. And then the second step is to solve for y. So if I subtract 5 from both sides, and then to get y by itself, I need to square root both sides. But keep in mind in math, whenever you square root to cancel out a square, you have to use that positive or negative symbol. Whenever you use a square root to make a square go away, you got to use the plus or minus symbol. So that puts us in a bind. Is it supposed to be positive or is it supposed to be negative? And to figure out which is which, go back to the definition of an inverse. An inverse function just has the domain and range swapped with an original function. So if the domain is x is greater than or equal to 0, the range needs to be y is greater than or equal to 0. So which one, the positive or the negative, would make us have y values that are greater than or equal to 0? It needs to be positive on the outside, right? Because if you went with that negative option, then you're talking about y values that would be below the y-axis. We want y to be positive values, to be greater than or equal to 0. And then if you were to graph this in Desmos, you should see something. It's an inverse, so it should be reflected about the x-axis, so something about the y equals x line, so something like that. But this is the correct option. You're going to want to watch out for that though, because if they said the domain was x is less than or equal to 0, then I need y in my inverse. I need y to be less than or equal to 0 because the y's and the x's are switched in an inverse function. And if it said this, I would need to pick the negative option. This would be my answer. Okay, but the function they want is this right here.